guys, it's Dana. Today I want to show you the proper way to gather fabric, which is a technique you will use time and again in a variety of projects. A friend asked me what gathering fabric meant because I think he pictured me at the fabric store gathering bolts and bolts of fabric in my arms, which I'm known to do. But to gather fabric means to cinch up and gather the layers of fabric together to make this kind of ruffled effect. In a previous video, I've shown you how to make ruffled streamers, and we used kind of a shortcut for gathering tons and tons of fabric, or paper streamers, which is great when you're doing something such as a little blanket, but it's not very precise. So I want to show you the proper method for gathering fabric, which is something you will use a lot when you're sewing garments, such as in this gathered skirt, which is one of my patterns called the Anywhere skirt. You can see the back is gathered and the front is gathered as well. Or oftentimes you'll use gathering on sleeves, such as this cute little dress. It gives it a very dainty, girly look. So let's go to our sewing machine. Let's pretend that we're making this miniature skirt here. This is our waistband, and this is the skirt part that we need to gather up to fit within our waistband. I'm threading my machine with some white thread, just so that you can see those stitches on my orange fabric and see what I'm doing. Just following the markings on my machine. Really easy to thread my machine. And then I press my favorite little button down here, the automatic needle threader. Press, and it threads for me. I love that on my baby lock. Now, we also want to increase our stitch length to the longest stitch length possible. That's a tongue twister to say. So come over here, I'm gonna go up to a 5. There we go, just like that. And the basic concept is that we're going to sew 3 parallel lines of stitching really close to each other, leaving tails on both ends, and then we will gather all of those stitches up. So you wanna leave a little tail, which if you can't get your bobbin tail out, sometimes what I do is I just sew a quick little piece, and then I press just my needle up position, pull it out, and then I have both of my tails out. Okay, leave them kind of long. That will give you extra room to be able to pull and gather your fabric together. Bring your fabric over, and I'm going to sew about 1/8 of an inch from the edge of the fabric. Now, some of this depends on what your seam allowance is for your skirt. So you want these gathers to kind of be hidden in the seam allowance, but if you sew out of the seam allowance, it's fine because you can actually remove these stitches later. That'll make sense when you're sewing something one day. Okay, let's get started. No back stitch. Ha! Just start sewing. And go right down. I'm going kind of slow, but if you find that you're going too fast, you can adjust your speed control right up here. And the reason I'm going slow is that I really want to keep my lines straight so that as I sew the other lines, they don't cross each other. When I get to the end, just do my needle up. I'm not going to cut the threads. Pull it out long so that I have another tail at the other end and cut it off. You can see I just made kind of like a basting stitch. Okay, now we're gonna go back and sew another parallel line about 1/8 of an inch over from that one. Oh, I almost backstitched. It's so habitual for me, but don't backstitch because you do not want to have a knot there. You want to be able to move the threads around. Lift my needle, pull it out. Now you could actually gather your fabric with 2 lines, but I find that sewing 3 lines just really gives you extra control over how those gathers are happening. So let's sew 1 more line. And in the words of Egon, do not cross the streams. It's very important that you don't let these stitch lines cross each other. If you do, you're not gonna be able to gather them up. They're just going to kind of, I don't know, create little knots in it. You'll see if you do it one time. Okay, made it to the end. Put my needle up and cut my threads. Okay, let me show you this. You can see our 3 lines that we sewed parallel to each other. And then on the ends here, we have all these tails of thread, which can be a little frustrating. It's just a lot going on. You have 3 threads that are coming off the top of your stitching and 3 threads on the bottom. So there's 6 tails hanging off here. What you wanna do is grab either the top 3 or the bottom 3, but not all of them. So I like to use my seam ripper, which I'm not gonna cut the threads. I'm just using it to kind of help separate them from each other so that I can grab only the top 3 or only the bottom 3. Again, it doesn't matter. So there you go. I have 3 threads here now. Pull them apart from my other ones. And then start pulling and pushing your fabric down, and you can see, just like that, it starts to gather up. And then you shimmy everything down, pull some more, gather, shimmy it down and adjust, pull a little more, and these threads are gonna start getting longer and longer, which only makes the process a little more frustrating. And you can see, here's why I wanted to sew those 3 lines. As I've gathered it up, I really have a lot of control over the fabric gathering, but then also hanging somewhat straight. If I only sewed 1 line, it would kind of be twisting in a bunch of directions. So I'm just gonna keep gathering this until I get to the desired length that I want. If you're gathering something that is really long, you might wanna gather half of it from this side, then go to the other side, pick up those 3 threads and gather the other direction, just so you're not shimmying and moving everything down for such a long distance. 3 threads is also great because if one of your threads breaks in the process, you got backup. Okay, I've gathered it quite a bit there. Let's grab our waistband piece for our pretend little skirt here and see how we've done. Okay, it's gathered a little too much, so I'm gonna let out a little bit on the ends, which is the reason why we didn't backstitch there, because if we had, you wouldn't be able to let it out on either side. You want to have a lot of freedom here to make it move as you'd like. That looks pretty good. Now I'm gonna pin this together and we'll sew it as if we were sewing a little skirt. I'm gonna place these together. Let's pretend it's a solid fabric, so it's hard to tell, but let's pretend these are right sides of the fabric together. Pin them in place. And actually, you probably would want to be pinning on this side so that you can see where your waistband is. So let's flip it over. And I'm going to show you when I sew how I like to use my left hand to kind of keep these gathers straight. Okay, go over to our machine and I want to go back down to a 2.5 stitch length, which is kind of a standard length. And then refrain from cutting these little strings here. I know you're going to want to because there's stuff going everywhere, but if you do that, the whole thing's going to just come apart, which can be so frustrating if you just gathered a ton of fabric. Now I'm going to use, let's say, like a 1/2 inch seam allowance. Again, this is just a pretend project. Do whatever is appropriate for your project. This time we are going to do a back stitch. And then here's what I was talking about. I'm going to use my left hand over here. See how it's kind of just bunching up? I'm going to use it to help my gathers stay straight-ish as I'm going. So here we go down. Just keep going. I'm sewing over my pins this time just because there are certain projects that you just need things to stay in place as you're going. Okay, almost to the end here. Do a back stitch. And let's take out our pins and see how it looks. Okay, there we go. That actually looks like a cute little skirt or an apron, or maybe something for a doll. You can see right here, there's a few little threads that are peeking through, which is no big deal. Just take your seam ripper, pull those threads out, and you're good. You don't have to pull all of these threads out in the back, just that one little part. And there you go. That's how you gather fabric. I'm sure you will find tons of uses for this technique in your projects. For more ideas and tutorials, visit my website, madeeveryday.com. And for more information on sewing machines, go to babylock.com, where it's all for the love of sewing. I'll see you guys next time. Bye.